series of webinar. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar series around the GCF Watch. People are still coming in, so we'll have a few minutes to let people connect, but have a very warm welcome. Welcome, everybody, to this webinar series. We're just waiting a few minutes until people come in, but have a very warm welcome. Okay, so now we're gonna really begin. Good day, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. Welcome to this webinar series. This is a 3-day event that we've organized around the GCF Watch. I want to especially thank the panelists, which will share their knowledge today with us in this session, Erica Lennon and Kairos de la Cruz. And I'd also like to give a very warm welcome to Bertha Argueta, who will be moderating this session today, and who has been crucial in the organization of this event. Finally, I'd also like to thank our translators who will make it possible for everyone to hear this session in Spanish or French, as well as in English. And before we start, I will pass the microphone to them so they can explain what you need to do, what you need to know to listen to this event in any of these 3 sessions. So the microphone is yours, María Angélica.
Gracias. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Mi nombre es María Angélica. Mis pronombres son ella y ellos. Hoy mi colega Flavia y yo estaremos proveyendo interpretación en español e inglés. Y nuestras colegas Marjorie y Chloe van a proveer interpretación en francés y en inglés. Esto lo hacemos para asegurarnos de que todos tengamos acceso a la información que se comparte en este espacio, al igual que la participación, sin importar el idioma que prefiramos. Entonces, hoy estamos utilizando la interpretación en la herramienta de Zoom y luce de esta forma. Como pueden ver en la pantalla, en la imagen de arriba, si nos acompañan desde su computador, en la esquina de abajo a la derecha de su pantalla van a ver un globo que dice interpretación. Cuando le hacen clic, pueden escoger español, si quieren escuchar en español, francés, si quieren escuchar en francés, inglés, si quieren escuchar en inglés, o si tal vez hablan los 3 idiomas y quieren escuchar el audio original, pueden tener su interpretación apagada. En la imagen que ven en la pantalla abajo, donde está el teléfono, van a ver que en la pantalla de su teléfono hay 3 punticos abajo a la mano derecha que dice más o more. Cuando tocan los 3 puntos, eligen interpretación de idiomas o language interpretation y pueden elegir el idioma de su preferencia. Cuando terminan, ponen hecho o finalizado. Les recordamos que participen hablando pausadamente y siéntanse libres de expresarse en el idioma que deseen en cualquier momento, entre el español, el francés y el inglés. También, si en algún momento de la presentación nos ven haciendo un símbolo con las manos, que es este, si ustedes lo pueden repetir también, eso nos ayudaría mucho. La justicia del lenguaje es un trabajo en equipo. Entonces, cuando ustedes nos ven haciendo esto, quiere decir que los intérpretes necesitamos que los oradores hablen más despacio. Si ustedes repiten eso, eso nos ayuda a que la persona que esté hablando pueda verlo y hable más despacio para que podamos interpretar su mensaje completamente. Eso es todo. Muchísimas gracias. Ahora voy a dar la explicación en inglés. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Maria Angelica. My pronouns are she and they. And today my colleague Flavia and I will provide interpretation in Spanish and in English. And our colleagues Chloe and Marjorie will provide interpretation in French and in English to ensure that we can all participate and have access to the information that's going to be shared in the space today, regardless of the language that we speak. So If you can see in the screen right now, on the top, if you're joining us on your computer, this is what Zoom interpretation will look like. At the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there is a globe that says interpretation. When you click on it, you can choose Spanish if you want to listen in Spanish, English if you want to listen in English, French if you want to listen in French. And if maybe you speak all three languages and you want to listen to the original audio, you can have your interpretation off. If you're joining us from your phone, as you can see at the bottom of the screen right now, there is 3 dots on the lower right-hand corner of your screen that say more. When you touch those dots, you choose language interpretation, and then you can choose the language of your preference, and then you press done. And we remind you, if you will be speaking today, to please space yourself to make sure that we can interpret you completely. And because language justice is a team effort, we use a tool to ask speakers to please slow down, which is this one. If you can see in the screen right now that I'm doing a hand motion, it means to please slow down. If you see us doing this at any point in time, if you could actually turn your camera on and replicate it so that the speaker may see it, that is very helpful because it helps us to interpret the person's message completely.
Whoa, please slow down.
Thank you so much. And now I will pass the mic to my French interpretation colleagues. Can folks hear my French interpretation colleagues?
No,
Marjorie or Chloe?
Marjorie,
We really can't hear them.
Okay, maybe I will continue, and after my short presentation, we can give the word to them.
Or I can just do it like really quickly. I don't think I can do it as well, but I'll give it a try. No?
Okay.
Donc, si vous avez besoin d'interprétation en français, vous pouvez trouver l'interprétation, si vous voyez l'image PowerPoint, vous voyez le symbole d'interprétation. Donc, si vous cliquez là-dessus, vous pouvez voir les différentes options. Vous avez l'espagnol, le français et l'anglais. Donc, faites clic sur français et terminez. Comme ça, vous allez pouvoir entendre l'interprétation en français. Si vous voulez entendre l'interprétation en anglais, vous pouvez rester sans interprétation. Comme ça, vous pourrez entendre la langue originelle. Et pour ceux qui vont parler aujourd'hui, si vous avez besoin si vous voyez que les interprètes ou d'autres personnes sur les caméras font le signe, je vais le montrer, je suis désolée, ma caméra n'est pas... Font ce signe-là, ça veut dire que vous parlez trop vite. Donc, si vous pouvez parler un peu plus lentement, comme ça, les interprètes ont le temps de comprendre votre message et de l'interpréter. Donc, je suis désolée si l'explication, mais si vous avez des problèmes, vous pouvez nous le faire savoir sur le chat aussi. Et comme ça, on va continuer pour ne pas retarder trop le webinaire. Merci.
Thank you, Berta. That was great. Okay, so, well, let's begin then. So the GCF Watch, around which this webinar series is being organized, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is an information platform around the GCF available online, led by organizations of the South, which seeks to promote the participation of Southern civil society with the GCF. Above all, what it does is to provide better systematization of all the information related to the fund, which can be a lot and very confusing at times. And in this way, it promotes better civil society monitoring of the projects and programs approved by the fund in the different countries. So today, in this first session of our 3-day event, Kairos de la Cruz will walk us through the platform So you'll get a better understanding of what it is and the opportunities it offers for our work as civil society following on the GCF. So I'd like to inaugurate this webinar series with some insights on why it is so important to do what we do when we monitor and follow on the GCF and other financial institutions. As we know, many financial institutions in this world have noble purposes, at least in the way they are stated. So we often see how they say that their main objective is to overcome poverty and to achieve prosperity for everyone and energy for all, sustainable development, relief from climate change, etc. They all sound really, really good, but we all know that many times the projects these financial institutions fund end up causing more harm than good in local communities and in the environment. This is why one of the reasons why civil society has so much work to do. Our monitoring is crucial to avoid damage and to secure the much needed promised benefits in the world. So what we do when we promote more and better participation around the decision of these projects and around their implementation, around the design of these projects, in fact, is also key in getting much better projects, because participations in decisions regarding the development that is done in certain territories is not only a right of the communities that live there, but is also a very, very important asset that must be appreciated. The projects will never be as good as they could be if they are designed with the participation of the people that live there, because they are the ones that know what they need and know what to expect. So the GCF is no exception, obviously. Its mandate to help developing countries reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and increase their ability to respond to climate change is very vital. The GCF is also the largest international fund dedicated to dealing with climate change, and it has a very important role in complying with the Paris Agreement, which wants to keep us below the 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it is very important that we as civil society remain alert and up to date in what is going on with the fund, so that the precious resources of this fund go, in fact, towards a more just and clean planet. Doing this in alliance with organizations and communities all over the world makes us more effective. And that is where the GCF Watch tries to help in allowing this international cooperation. So we decided on making this event international, inviting everyone to the same time slot, even though the problem of the time difference is a bit of a problem. So people here, some people are connecting very, very early and some people are connecting very, very late, and we appreciate that effort because the GCF Watch owes much of its great potential to the fact that it allows the joining of efforts throughout the different regions. So it's a big world, but we all work together around the GCF Watch. So today we have the great opportunity to have people from all over the world in the table, including the 3 regions which are represented with the regional nodes in the GCF. This is the target countries where projects and programs are implemented: Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So with this, finally, with the registration you did to attend this session, you have been automatically registered to attend the 3 sessions. So we really look forward to sharing all this information and insights with you in all these 3 sessions. They will all allow for interaction with the public as well as presentations. So with this, I pass the microphone to our moderator, Bertha, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Florencia. And just to have a quick, before we move to the presentations, just to give you some more details on what Florencia just mentioned. As you know, the webinar series has 3 sessions. Today's session is an introduction to the GCF Watch platform and an overview of the work that the CSO community is hoping to do and achieve for this year in their engagement with the GCF fund. Then we have a second session on July the 8th, which will be more focused on issues that are relevant to CSOs and local communities around gender aspects, RED+ and indigenous peoples within the GCF. And the final one on July 29 is going to be more focused on how to engage with the GCF from the different regions. So in here, we're going to bring all the focal points from Latin America, Africa, and Asia to give us an insight into what it's like at a regional level to engage with the fund in specific countries. So, and also we will have some I would say feedback from the board meeting that the GCF will have at the beginning of July. And today, as you saw in the invitation, after this introduction, we will have an overview of what the GCF Watch platform is and what it intends to achieve. And then we'll move to the takeaways from the last board meeting of the Green Climate Fund and what the main topics of focus for the CSO community will be in 2021. Just a quick reminder, I'm sorry to go back to this, if you could all, for purposes of the funder of this event, write, as well as your names, the institutions that you represent in the participant list. That would be greatly appreciated. It's not mandatory. You can disagree with this and it wouldn't be a problem, but just it would be very helpful for all of us as well. And finally, I would like to introduce now Kairos de la Cruz, who is the Executive Director and Head of the Climate Finance Team in ICSC. And he leads ICSC in tackling various pressing issues surrounding climate finance access and accountability. He implemented the Adaptation Finance Accountability Initiative in 2014 and now is leading is a lead in sustaining FI by expanding its lenses to include mitigation, gender, and forestry tags. So he will give us an introduction to the GCF Watch platform, what it does and what it intends to achieve. So thanks, and Kairos, you have the floor.
Oh, excuse me. While Kairos gets his microphone working, because you're in mute, you can write your questions in the chat during the presentations, and there will also be a space to ask them by raising your hand at the end of the presentation. So you're all invited to participate in this way. Thank you. Go on, Kairos, please.
Hi, I hope you can hear me, and I hope you can see my screen. Hi, I would like to introduce myself first. I'm Angelo Kairos Torres de la Cruz. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities. As Bertha said, I also lead ICSC's Climate Finance team. And GCF Watch, ICSC sort of provides the technical back-end support to the rest of the initiative. As one of the founding members of GCF Watch, we're really quite excited that this webinar is finally hitting the ground with a lot of participants, because we really think that GCF Watch has a lot of potentials, especially in elevating the work that all of you guys do on the ground in your engagement to the Green Climate Fund. So this is just a splash page. You can check it out later. It's gcfwatch.org. The website as it is right now, it's still evolving in terms of design, in terms of how things are arranged in categories, for example, simply because the content materials that we've been getting for the past few weeks have really been dynamic, which required us to change the way the website is actually structured right now. Just some additional context on why GCF Watch actually happened a few years back. I think if I remember it right, the first discussions of having a GCF Watch started around 2016, 2017. The idea is that the Green Climate Fund portfolio is definitely growing, and it's expected to grow even more in the years to come. And having all of these years of experience in terms of engaging communities and coming up and approving projects, it's only logical to assume that the years of being operational would actually have a lot of experiences that need to be captured and more voices heard, especially from communities that might have been affected, whether positively or negatively, by GCF funded projects. It is also a realization that civil society observers of the GCF represent a huge knowledge base that is responsible for groundbreaking work and grassroots mobilization. If you ever get the chance to attend a GCF board meeting, immediately you realize that there's a lot of civil society observers in the room, and each one represents his or her own constituency back home. And it just generates a lot of information really quickly. However, the curation of this content, the management of how this content is presented, on how this content is distributed, remains a challenge for everyone. And because of these things, a small, relatively small group of civil society observers decided to have GCF Watch a go, and started building the website to what it is right now. GCF Watch, by definition, as mentioned by Florencia a while ago, it's a Southern-led initiative established to promote and facilitate engagement and accelerate the readiness of Southern civil society organizations, indigenous peoples, and local communities to engage with the GCF. We do have an evolving mandate. When everything started, the idea is that GCF Watch is made by civil society organizations, particularly for CSOs. But then we already realized that GCF Watch is actually useful beyond civil society organizations, even to the GCF Secretariat, as a matter of fact, because the way the website is presenting all of this generated content and knowledge materials, it just makes everything easier. I mean, if you're following the Green Climate Fund discussions. So from just being a repository of information specifically for CSOs, now we're trying to measure how GCF Watch might be affecting, for example, reports of the Green Climate Fund Secretariat and other engagement, even by some of our nationally designated authorities as well. GCF Watch seeks to become a platform of elevating local concerns to levels that might have sounded impossible if you're a part of a small community organization. So GCF Watch would very much love to elevate the voices from the ground, and that would be done through the regional nodes that seek to represent community and local organizations. GCF Watch is pretty much open for all. I mean, there's no membership, like strict membership of who can contribute. There's no subscription, and so it's just open for all. And it's led by a steering committee and an advisory council. The steering, and let me spend a few minutes to talk about these two bodies. The steering committee is represented by the regional nodes. As mentioned a while ago, the regional nodes includes a representative from Asia, Latin America, and Africa. We're also thinking about whether it's a possibility to even expand the Asia regional node to also cover the Pacific, because we're quite conscious that there's a growing demand as well for the inclusion of that part of the world, in terms of size of projects, in terms of numbers, in terms of experiences as well. The steering committee, by design, is the highest governing body of the initiative. It's in charge of basically ensuring the achievement of the objectives of the initiative, up to sustaining the whole initiative as well, and up to the more mundane and more clerical work of designing the website, agreeing on what changes should happen, requesting for technical tweaks and stuff like that. So the steering committee is sort of just to add some predictability in the decision-making process of the GCF Watch. The steering committee does those roles. The advisory council is by invitation extended to individuals and organizations who have very high interest in helping out the steering committee. And it's a very collegial body. I mean, the two of the steering committee and the advisory council It's a very it's very collegial in nature. People tend to, every time we have a meeting, I mean, everyone just contributes their ideas and so on. And so far, I think we were able to do so because of GCF Watch, Watch's ways of doing work, which is built on trust at the center. And the assumption is that everyone, as represented by the steering committee and the advisory council, will try to maintain the right balance, for example, in terms of materials being curated by the website, in terms of working dynamically, because we do recognize that civil society organizations could be lumped, as a single sector in the GCF discussions, but civil society organizations tend to do work very differently and very dynamically. So both bodies are in charge of, trying to make the platform as flexible as much as possible. And definitely, I think this is very crucial, that if both bodies have to prioritize, the prioritization would always be in favor of, for example, if we're talking about materials, the prioritization would be in favor of the most local material possible, because, as I mentioned, GCF Watch is pretty much intended to amplify the voice from local communities and from localities. So GCF Watch, as I've said, it's managed by two collegial bodies, and it pretty much reflects the way it does its work as well. GCF Watch is only sustained through content sharing. Organizations, and to some extent even individuals, can share content materials as long as it follows GCF Watch's basic guidelines of materials. And these basic guidelines are not meant to limit contributions. They're more meant to sort of make sure that there's a bit of uniformity on the materials presentation to the website. Content curation, as I've said, is also managed by the steering committee and the advisory council, because it follows, it has different timelines, right? Different materials have different timelines as well in terms of urgency. So, for example, a call to action might need more immediate. Sorry, my kid just walked up. So more immediate attention. So the steering committee and the advisory council would decide on those things. But definitely all contributions to the GCF Watch, I mean, there's no such thing as a content contribution being rejected. It's just more, I mean, the experience so far is just, people try to find the perfect timing to sort of present and curate these content materials. So how can you contribute to GCF Watch? I mean, just in case you already have something sitting in your laptop or in your organization's website that you want to share, it's quite easy and it's pretty straightforward. First is, just reach out. I mean, if you're trying to reach, specific members of the regional nodes, it's quite easy to remember. If you're contributing from Asia, then just reach out to Asia at gcfwatch.org. For Latin America, it's Latin America at gcfwatch.org. And for Africa, it's Africa at gcfwatch.org. And for everything else, if you have like cross-cutting concerns that does not really pertain to a specific region, you can reach out to info@gcfwatch.org. Just send in your content. I mean, as long as you reach out, we'll be able to share the guidelines with you as well. It's really, I mean, the guidelines is pretty much basic. I mean, as far as I remember, we only require, is a specific like image size, for example, or a short introduction to a long report that you want to share. To help you curate that, I'm quite sure, a wonderful report as well. And the last step is just wait for the notice. I mean, it usually takes between 1 to 2 weeks for your contribution to be uploaded in the website. We'll definitely give you some time to sort of think about whether we presented it right. We'll provide you links, and we'll provide you, a short list of platforms where we cross-posted your information, your provided contribution. Sorry. Yeah, that's GCF Watch. That's very basic, but I'll be more than happy to answer questions as we go along. Yeah, thank you and good evening from the Philippines.
Thank you so much, Kairos. We know the difficulties of home office. It was very cute to hear your baby in the background. So now, as Kairos mentioned, please share your questions in the Q&A, or you can always wait for the last part of the webinar where we'll have some space for questions and answers and all other discussions you might want to have around the work that's being presented. And right now we're going to move to our next panelist, who is Erica Lennon. Erica is a senior attorney in the Climate and Energy Program at the Center for International Environmental Law. And her work focuses on the intersections of human rights and climate change, climate finance, the UNFCCC, and climate accountability. She is currently serving as the civil society active observer to the Green Climate Fund for the developed countries constituencies. And prior to joining CL, she worked in the environmental law program at American University Washington College of Law, focusing on climate accountability and the international climate regime. So Erica will give us an overview of what's been happening with the Green Climate Fund this year and what the focus is for CSOs for the remainder of 2021. So Erica, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Bertha, let me just share my screen. Give me 1 second. Great. Hopefully you all can see this. Oh, let me go. 1 second. Sorry, while I'm getting this to work properly and for myself and moving it to a different screen, I'll just introduce myself. So as Bertha mentioned, I'm a senior attorney at CL, the Center for International Environmental Law. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And as also mentioned, I'm currently serving as the civil society active observer to the Green Climate Fund. And as Kairos mentioned, civil society at the GCF works collaboratively, and there are many civil society, Indigenous peoples, local community groups who attend the GCF meetings and who participate, even if they're not attending, in preparing for GCF board meetings, because there are obviously projects and policies that affect people around the world, and not everyone can always attend or go to Songdo, which is where the GCF meets. And so we work collaboratively across a space to plan and prepare for meetings and to make sure that, much like GCF Watch, we're really elevating voices of communities and people on the ground. And so I, along with one of my colleagues from developing countries, am able to, on behalf of the network of observers and Indigenous peoples and local communities that we collaborate with, am able to participate directly in the board meetings and to speak on behalf of the civil society constituency to share our views with board members. So I just wanted to give that as background as well. And so I'm going to focus on sort of the takeaways from the last board meeting, or B28, which just means that it is the 28th meeting of the board of the Green Climate Fund, and to sort of present on what they've done so far this year, and to look ahead a bit into what's coming in 2021 and beyond. So that brings me to sort of what's in a board meeting? What do they do? So pretty much there are 3 board meetings a year, typically, of the GCF. One earlier in the year, so the one I'm talking about took place the end of February, I think. There's normally one around February, March, one that is around the end of June, beginning of July. So there will be one the last week of this month. If anyone is interested in being involved in preparing for that, we'd happily have you as part of our network. And then there's one in the fall. So typically at a board meeting, the GCF board is composed of representatives from countries. So from their 24 board members, with 12 coming from developed countries and 12 coming from developing countries. So it's a balanced board. They report to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, to the COP, to the Conference of the Parties. And so every time they meet and they come together to discuss a variety of things. So they discuss funding proposals, which are proposals that have been brought by accredited entities to the GCF, which can either be international institutions, international development finance institutions, international banks, or they can be nationally, they can be more local and national entities, or what we refer to commonly as direct access entities, based in country or based regionally, that work with the countries and the nationally designated authorities in countries to develop and present projects and funding proposals, projects and programs for mitigation or adaptation or a combination thereof. So that's one thing that happens at a board meeting. They also discuss the accreditation of entities. So they discuss new entities that want to work with the GCF and to be accredited. Right now they have approximately a little over 100 entities that they work with. And so new ones are presented to become accredited so that they too can then present funding proposals to the GCF. At the board meeting, they also discuss policies. So the GCF is still in the process of developing many of its policies on a wide variety of issues, ranging from environmental and social safeguards, gender, how to prevent sexual abuse, exploitation, and harassment, to fiduciary policies, to policies on co-financing and on making, on improving, there to be simplified approval processes for funding, to think about how they do accreditation. So it's a wide-ranging number of things that are discussed at meetings, and those policies are discussed so that they can be approved by the board. Because often the Secretariat, which is the sort of entity that runs the GCF, develops these, and then but the board has to approve what is coming through because they're the board of directors. And then the rest of the board meeting often then includes information reports, which are reports from a variety of entities. So there's reports from the Secretariat about what they're doing. There are reports from groups within the board, so board committees, because they have committees on accreditation, they have committees on ethics, a variety of issues, from panels and groups that may have been constituted by the board, such as the accreditation panel or anything like that, as well as from independent units. The GCF has 3 independent units. One, an independent redress mechanism that is for that is primarily for people who may have been, who think they will be or may have been harmed by a GCF funded project. An independent integrity unit that deals with issues around fraud and corruption, and an independent evaluation unit that evaluates how the GCF is doing in its performance. And so all of those entities sort of share information and provide information to the board on their work, on what they're doing, on the status of the GCF resources, the pipeline, how the funding proposals are going, to help provide the board with information and to give the board the opportunity to ask questions and to accept this information, in addition to approving or not approving funding proposals or accreditation. So that's how a board meeting works. And we have been meeting for the last, in times of COVID, it's been meeting virtually. Otherwise, it's normally in person, primarily in Songdo, South Korea, which is where the board is located. And it takes place generally over 3 or 4 days. And so prior to that, the groups, the civil society groups and indigenous peoples groups and local communities all meet to work to prepare interventions and information that we as a community and as a constituency want to share during the board meeting and with the board members, to make sure that, you know, the proposals that are going through are good proposals and are ones that communities want to see and that don't harm communities, and that the entities that are being accredited are the types of entities that the GCF should be working with, and that the policies they're developing are really helping to advance, you know, critical areas and making sure that they're not doing more harm than good for improving access to finance for developing countries, to make sure that they're, you know, promoting gender equality and human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples in climate finance action. So that's what typically happens at a board meeting. So I'm going to go into a bit of the nitty gritty of sort of what the last board meeting was like and looking forward. So looking at what were the dynamics of B28. So a couple things is that, as I mentioned, we're still in a virtual setting, which presents its challenges because people, you know, in addition to connection issues and the fact that people are all around the world, and so it's different times of day, you know, it is obviously or arguably more challenging, or it can be, to interact when you're not face to face and you're trying to negotiate and discuss things purely through a Zoom screen. Additionally, as it was the first board meeting of the year, there were 2 new co-chairs. So there are always co-chairs of the board, but they serve a year term. And there's always one from developed countries and one from the developing countries constituencies. And so this time it is the 2 co-chairs, the new co-chairs are from France and Mexico. And so they work together to develop the agenda of the board meeting, and they run the meeting. But the 2 ones were new and also fairly new to the GCF, and were not people who had been sitting on the GCF board prior to that. And so there was a bit of a learning curve, or a bit of interesting dynamics as they tried to navigate what can be a tricky space. There are also new board members because as the year changed, you know, there are changes in governments or who's representing different countries or constituencies, changes at the beginning of the year, because typically people serve a year term and sometimes it goes longer depending on how the country or the constituency chooses their board members or their alternates. And one of the things that it seemed to come through was that there was some sort of increased concern or oversight of the Secretariat, where you know, some of what in the discussions of, particularly, I'll think of, like, you know, the results management framework and things like that, it seemed like the board was being a bit more, providing a bit more scrutiny and wanting more oversight and control of what the Secretariat was doing. So that's just some of the background dynamics to know, because each board meeting is a little bit different. And so that brings me to what happened at the board meeting. So, you know, one of the things that is most often concentrated on and that takes a fair amount of time is funding proposals. And so at the last board meeting, 15 funding proposals were approved, which represented around 1.2 billion US dollars. This brings the GCF portfolio up to a little over 160 projects or programs that have been approved around the world. and these numbers are just for the group that was approved at B28, 73% of it was for mitigation and 27% was for adaptation. The GCF is supposed to have a balance between adaptation and mitigation that it is approaching or near, depending on how you calculate the percentage for mitigation and adaptation. Primarily, the funding proposals came from international access entities. So as I explained, the GCF works through accredited entities, and they can be international access entities or direct access entities. And ideally, there would be more funding and more projects and programs running through the direct access entities that are at the regional level or at the local level, and so closer to the countries and to the communities, rather than going through big international financial institutions like the big development banks, like the World Bank or the African Development Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank, or through, UN agencies like the UN Development Program, UNDP, or the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. But so those, or even international banks like Deutsche Bank, which is an accredited entity, and that they would be going more to the local and the direct access entities. At the last board meeting, the vast majority, I think all but 2, went to international access entities. And overall in the GCF portfolio, approximately 80% of the money right now is through international access entities, which is often one of the things highlighted by civil society, as well as by board members, wanting there to be more access for the direct access entities. And they give out funding through a variety of instruments, including loans, grants, providing equity. There was a large equity fund in India that was approved at the last board meeting, or through guarantees, and all things happened at the last board meeting. In addition to funding proposals, the other things that they discussed were the review and structure of the Independent Technical Advisory Panel, or the ITAP, which reviews funding proposals and is able to assesses them against criteria and to recommend conditions and to recommend which funding proposals can go through. The board also, while they're considering funding proposals, can and do put on conditions sometimes, depending on the project or the entity, to make sure that certain things are being met to reduce risk, sometimes risk to communities, sometimes risk to the project itself, or to enhance the project, to make sure that there's oversight and that what is intended to happen happens with little harm happening. So there was a review of the structure and how that body works. They also approved a policy that was longstanding, or that was long under consideration, on addressing gaps in the current portfolio for measurement, as well as at every meeting they discuss the dates and venues for what meeting is happening next. And so they decided on the next meeting being virtual, and that it was going to actually take place at the end of June. So it seems from that overview that not a lot happened, which is true. So this next slide shows you what didn't happen, because typically more than that would have happened at a board meeting. And so a lot of things didn't happen, some because they were contentious, some because they spent a lot of time discussing the agenda for the meeting, particularly with the new co-chairs in place. And so what didn't happen? There was no accreditation. There were no new accredited entities approved, which typically at a meeting, accredited entities are always approved. There were 6 potential entities up for accreditation, most of which were development banks at the national level, so national level development banks, and 1 international entity, SMBC, which is a large Japanese bank, that has received a lot of scrutiny, particularly from civil society groups, because of SMBC's financing of fossil fuels, including coal, and its continued financing of fossil fuels, including coal. And so there have been a lot of campaigns to have them not get accredited by the GCF. And so when the board was discussing this, one of the things they were discussing was about putting conditions on SMBC, and the board couldn't agree on how they were going to approve the accredited entities and whether they were going to be able to put on conditions or what those conditions were, or whether they were going to approve them individually or all as one package, approving all 6 at once. And so ultimately they didn't approve them for accreditation, which means they'll likely come up again at this upcoming board meeting, though those documents haven't been released yet. There's also the head of the independent evaluation unit has left the GCF, and so there's an interim head. And so there's supposed to be a selection process for the new head. And they were supposed to kick that off, and they couldn't agree to the terms for that, both because there have been some challenges where board members have questioned the evaluations coming out of the IEU, and so there were some board members who wanted to review not only the terms for the new head, but for the unit itself. And so that was a contentious process. And so they haven't concluded what the selection process will be to choose the new head of the IEU. So again, it will likely be discussed at board meetings coming up. Anytime that something isn't, often if something isn't discussed or decided on at the specific board meeting, it ends up coming up at a future one, because it's not that it's not important, it's that they can't decide on it. And so it has to come up eventually or come up in between meetings. There were a number of policies they were considering that they ended up not being able to approve, both because some they weren't able to approve because there hadn't been enough time for consultation. Some was because a number of board members have objected to approving any policies in the virtual setting because of the difficulties of the virtual setting. And so a number of board members have said we can't approve policies at all, and so only wanted to discuss the potential policies for information and to discuss them rather than working to approve them, which then meant they didn't approve any of the policies. So those were things related to the integrated results management framework for how the GCF tracks results, an update to the simplified approval approach for projects, which is designed to make it easier or make a more simplified process for funding proposals for projects and programs that are deemed no risk, or in GCF parlance, category C, so that they, because they have no risk, no environmental and social risk, so are not likely to harm the environment or communities, that they could go through a more simple process, which would help get the funding proposal to go through the process quicker and to provide better access to climate finance. And so that's been ongoing to update that process to make it more simplified than it has been. And so they discussed it, but it wasn't approved. They were also looking at a revised policy on sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, which had changes both to that policy itself and to the environmental and social policy, but hadn't gone through a consultation, or including a consultation with civil society, Indigenous peoples, local community groups. And so that couldn't go through. The evaluation policy had long been on the agenda. They also, because of the initial discussions or the debates around the agenda itself and what they were going to do and how they were going to work, they didn't get to the part of the agenda where they hear updates and standard reports from the Secretariat or board committees or the independent units. And they also weren't able to discuss some pending evaluations from the independent evaluation unit. Since then, so the board is able to take decisions between meetings. And so as decisions between meetings where they send out an email saying this is being presented to the board for a decision between meetings on a no objection basis, for a period of anywhere between 7 days and I think a month, but the lowest is 7 days. And then if they get no objections, it's approved. This, I know, is a concerning trend because it severely reduces the ability of civil society and Indigenous peoples to interact with those policies, or to give their views on those policies, or to talk to board members, because some of them are not shared because they're limited distribution to board members only. And so we don't even know that the board is taking a decision between meetings until after it's passed, which is what happened with the administrative remedies and exclusion policy. And it also just limits the ability, in a board meeting, as civil society, as a constituency, we're able to speak, we're able to communicate during the board meeting itself. We do outreach to board members, and between meetings, this is significantly harder. But between the board meetings, they did approve a revised policy on sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. As I mentioned, the administrative remedies and exclusion policy, the evaluation policy, as well as making decisions about accrediting new observer organizations and a member of the ITAP. And there have been a couple additional decisions that were proposed, but have received objections from board members, which means that they can't go through. And so will have to be discussed or worked through later. So as you can see on this slide, what to look for ahead in 2021 and beyond, frankly, because this will all not happen in 2021, especially as we're still in a virtual setting. But these are things to look forward to that are still outstanding. So as I mentioned, there will be at least 2 more board meetings, one upcoming at the end of this month and one that is currently scheduled for October. The GCF has been developing sectoral guidance to try and put together guidance documents that are designed to give accredited entities information about what they can do in certain sectors. And they're open for comment and for commenting periods. And so they've released drafts of a number of them and taken comments on drafts on a policy on agriculture and food security, and one on cities and urban buildings. Right now, they're taking comments on one on forest and land use, one on ecosystems and ecosystem services, and one on energy. And so they're developing these sector guidance, and at some point, I think they will present them to the board. But that's an ongoing process and an ongoing consultation with board members, with accredited entities, and with civil society communities, Indigenous peoples groups. And we work together as an observer network, also to put together joint comments, as well as individual organizations put them together. There are a lot of policies that are still outstanding. So there's a review of the RED Plus, Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation, results-based payment pilot program, because they've spent out all of the money that the GCF had for that. And so they're reviewing the program and trying to see what comes next for RED Plus results-based payments. As I mentioned, they need to do the updated simplified approval process for projects and programs. They're developing a policy on programmatic approaches, because it's not just funding of individual projects. They've been funding larger programs that are more thematic, that then have sub-projects, which have, come with consequences for information disclosure and ability to track the money and where GCF money is going, and to really make sure that communities are involved. And so they need to come up with a policy for that, to try and make it more transparent, from our perspective, make it more transparent and make sure it's still participatory and doesn't cause harm or lack of ability to seek redress if there is harm, etc. They're working on an adaptation approach to make sure that there's adaptation financing coming through, an updated accreditation framework, which should be coming up at this next board meeting, which includes a project-specific assessment approach, potentially, so that there can be some projects that are approved without an entity being accredited, only one project per entity, but to try and speed up some of the ability to get projects because the accreditation process takes a long time, and this approach has is somewhat concerning to observer organizations because there's value in the entities having to go through accreditation to make sure that they have policies that respect rights, that have strong fiduciary standards, et cetera. There are a number of investment framework policies that they need to discuss on incremental and full cost accounting, concessionality, et cetera. They need to discuss how the rules around preventing sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment are incorporated into the environmental and social policy now that they've gone through a comment period on the updates to that policy. The GCF has long needed to develop its own environmental and social safeguards. It's used interim safeguards from the International Finance Corporation as sort of specific safeguards on labor, on environmental impact assessments that work together with the GCF's environmental and social policy, but they need to develop their own environmental and social safeguards. They're long overdue for a review of observer participation, so how we all participate. They're updating. Yes.
Excuse me, this is the interpreter. Can I please slow down a bit?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Sorry about that. So they also need to update their information disclosure policy, which they've been doing a review of. They need to update their guidelines on decision-making without a board meeting. So as I mentioned, there are times when things don't get done at a board meeting and they want to be able to take a decision on something. And so it goes through the process of a no objection procedure. And they've been working on trying to develop guidelines for how to do this better. And so that is still outstanding. They're reviewing a private sector strategy to how to engage better with the private sector and private sector financing, as well as a review of the private sector facility. They're doing a review and update of their country ownership guidelines because one of the mandates of the GCF is to truly be based in country ownership, so that it is the countries the projects and the programs that are coming are the ones that the countries want and aren't sort of a top-down approach from accredited entities, but more bottom up. And so they're reviewing the guidelines to make sure that that's better. Beyond 2021 a bit, and there are probably things, I will say that last slide was a non-exhaustive slide of what is left, or what may take place this year and what they're still working on. But beyond 2021, they're also looking to every 5 years, entities are up for reaccreditation. And so the first group of entities that were accredited to the GCF are basically at their 5 years and so have to be reaccredited. And so the board will have to reaccredit those entities, including looking at, how they've done, whether or not the entities want to be reaccredited. And one of the key things, I think, from a number from civil society perspective, is that one of the things they're supposed to look at is how the GCF has helped shift financial flows away from fossil fuels and to help keep below 1.5. And so looking at looking at the whole portfolio of an entity. And so looking at how the entities have shifted their portfolio away from fossil fuel finance. And so that should be part of the reaccreditation discussion. They're also going to be launching a second performance review of the GCF. So the GCF, when it began, went through an initial resource mobilization to capitalize the fund to get money from countries so that it could provide money for climate finance projects. And then before the first replenishment period, the independent evaluation unit did a forward-looking performance review. And so we are quickly, shockingly, seemingly approaching the GCF's second replenishment period, where they again will go back to where they will go to countries and need recapitalization and money towards towards climate finance and to mitigation and adaptation projects at the moment. And so there's going to be a second performance review that's done to accompany and to lead into the GCF's second replenishment. And so that process is starting this year, but will continue into 2022, and then into to inform the second replenishment. And so that's sort of what is on the horizon. And if you look at the sort of what the board has been planning on doing, I've tried to capture what's in there, but obviously there's more to come. And that's the end. So hopefully that gives you a snapshot of how board meetings work, and how civil society works at those board meetings to try and interact and really make sure it's the fund that we want to see. And so thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Erica, for that very comprehensive presentation. I see there's one question, but I would like to start with my privileges as, the moderator with a broader question before we move to that one. And that will give us time as well for other questions to come in, but we'll definitely get back to that one, so don't worry. I just wanted to ask you and Kairos and everyone, and to start a conversation, because you mentioned the difficulties of the virtual setting. And I think this is a topic that it's coming up not only for the GCF, but in broader processes related to climate change. And you also mentioned the difficulties that come with a diminished space for participation of CSOs and local communities, because we're not in person, because we can't reach out in person to the board members. So do you think that this virtual setting that coronavirus has pushed us all in has in any way diminished the possibilities of engagement of the civil society organizations? And is it being used in a way to also, make information less publicly available, or close down the spaces for engagement for civil society? Yeah, I don't know, Erica, if you want to come in. Yeah.
I can jump in and try and answer, and then maybe Kairos, you can jump in as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm trying to think of the best answer. I mean, obviously there are challenges of the virtual setting and not being in person, ranging from connection issues to time zones, as somewhat demonstrated by this call, where it is well into Kairos's evening and it is my very early morning, sorry for the sun sort of rising near me and impeding what my camera, as well as it does make it more challenging to interact with the Secretariat and with board members. I also think that one of the things that has been challenging is that, as a community, we really work together as the group of sort of observers following the GCF to make sure that we're hearing from voices on the ground, that the visions we're presenting are united and are agreed upon positions, and that we're expressing concerns. And it is challenging to come up with those in having to do all of the preparations virtually and not in person before the meeting. It also, in some ways, speeds up the timeline. So if the GCF gives, documents 20 days before the board meeting, but starts having sessions, where we're able to ask questions about funding proposals, or when we're having to do our preparations, not in the 2 or 3 days before the board meeting, but in the week and a half before the board meeting, that means that the 21 days we had to review something is actually shrunk to like a week or 2 weeks, which I think is a challenge, especially as the GCF is often not what what someone from civil society is solely focused on, right? So like right now, a number of people are focused on what's happening at the UNFCCC. So I think that has its challenges for CSO engagement, as well as obviously there are challenges for CSO engagement on the ground as pandemics have led to not being able to have in-person meetings. So how do you make sure you're doing consultations with communities that may be affected by the projects, and how do you make sure they're getting information when there can't be meetings in person because of COVID-19? And so that is a challenge. There is, there can be things where, people who may not have been able to go to a meeting can connect to it when it's in a virtual setting. But I think that's diminished CSO engagement. And I do think it is a challenge for information disclosure and for closing spaces, just because I think it becomes easier to be able to sort of say like, oh, well, we couldn't, give that information, or we couldn't have that meeting because of COVID. So like, we can't do that. I also think the challenges of the boards, the reluctance to discuss some policies, I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, and this is just my interpretation, it seems like we've had more decisions between meetings, which I think impact civil society's ability to engage with them. And I think that has happened as a result of not being able to get to things during the virtual meeting. But I'll stop and maybe turn it over to Kairos.
Yeah, I mean, you covered most of the right answers, even for me. But I have to agree that because of the virtual setup, at least specifically for the Green Climate Fund board meetings, it has diminished the capacity, the flexibilities of civil society organizations to sort of approach things differently than just looking at a single document. I mean, if you ever had the chance to go to a board meeting, I mean, the coffee breaks and the informal meetings are as much as at the same level at some extent of importance when you compare it to the actual board meeting. Because a lot of these things, I mean, most of civil society organization observers do have campaigning backgrounds, right? It's very hard to campaign for something if you're just looking at the camera. It's very easy to make someone uncomfortable over coffee. It's very hard to do it through a laptop. But I also think, I mean, with the virtual setups, I mean, GCF has adapted to virtual options for quite a while now. I mean, you can follow the Green Climate Fund board meeting online, even pre-COVID time. But it's just that, getting information on the ground has really been a challenge. And I think, I mean, GCF Watch is not the answer to that. I mean, GCF Watch could catalyze, a heightened interest within the region. But that would require, more contributions. That would require more more proactive steps from the regional nodes as well. So it's basically, it should be a joint effort as well. So yeah, I mean, the COVID, at least, I mean, it has its challenges. It forces us to adapt really quickly on something that's really life-changing. But in the same way, I think it also shows, the value of connections and stuff like that. So hopefully the next time we meet over coffee, we would actually talk more. Thank you.
Thanks, Kairos. Thanks very much to both of you for that. And I'll move to the questions in the chat. The first one is, what is the state of the program of payments for results of RED Plus, and what is the perspectives for the future of that program? That is the first one. And then there's a second one that's, can I know accredited members from Africa, as well as accredited members from Europe with engagements in Africa? Perhaps national CSOs may want to engage through third-party accredited members. I'm assuming you mean accredited entities, so the people that can access the fund and are accredited to access funding. So those are the two first questions. I do have others in the chat, but we can start maybe with the status of RED Plus results payment program, and a quick overview of accredited entities involved in Africa that CSOs could engage with in the region if you have an idea. Thank you.
So on the status of RED Plus, so they had a pilot program on RED Plus results-based payment that was supposed to last through this year. It got spent out with a number of RED Plus projects in Brazil and Indonesia and Costa Rica and Colombia, and I'm forgetting others. I think there were 5 or 6. They're currently undergoing a review. So they've had interviews with experts and with board members. They've had a small consultation with experts and board members and some observers, and they're doing an ongoing review to try and determine what should come next. And the board has not yet signaled what that will be, like whether it will be, it seems like it would most likely be a new envelope or a new, like, sort of like, you know, we'll have $5 million for this. But they're also sort of reviewing how they evaluate projects, including that they have a specific scorecard for it. Yeah, so that's RED. And then the next question was on African accredited entities.
Yes.
Kairos, do you have a good answer on that? I mean, I can try, but.
I mean, most of the, I mean, I can't list down the accredited entities, but most of the information I think is available on the GCF website. That's the first place to go because GCF Watch, you know, doesn't have any intention to sort of replicate the official website of the GCF. But what GCF Watch has been trying to do is sort of map out where these entities are located and who are the focal persons that you can actually send an email to. But if there's really high interest, I mean, specifically for Africa, I think it would be best if you can, you know, send an email to the African regional node, and it's at africa@gcfwatch.org.
Thanks, Kairos. And I've provided a link to the GCF website where accredited entities are, so that you can, like, the person that answered that question, that asked that question, can have a look as well. And as Kairos said, ideally you would contact the regional node, which is PACJA in Africa, and they can, I'm sure they can just, you know, give you a more detailed overview of engagement. I have a few questions in the other chat. So the first one is, do you think reaccreditation should take into account IRM process performance on access to information and relation with human rights inside countries, or behaviors related to this theme? So is human rights, track, access to information, all of these, should these be required for reaccreditation? I think that's quite an interesting question as well.
The short answer is yes. That's the very short and sweet answer is absolutely. When they're reaccrediting entities, climate action and finance and projects for mitigation and adaptation shouldn't be an excuse to not respect human rights and the rights of Indigenous peoples, or to, which includes access to information. And it can't just be that, like, oh, it's a climate project, so we don't have to respect human rights. In fact, climate projects should be guided by respect for human rights and the rights of Indigenous peoples, and should include communities in their development to make for more effective climate action. And so absolutely, when they're looking at reaccreditation, they they should make sure they're looking at those track records, including if there have been processes at the IRM, both because it's what they should be doing and also because the GCF does have policies for information disclosure, and the environmental and social policy includes that they're supposed to respect human rights. And there's an Indigenous peoples policy that includes respect for rights of Indigenous peoples, including things like free, prior, and informed consent. And in order to be an accredited entity for the GCF, you should have to follow GCF policies. So yes.
Yeah, it's a yes for me too. This feels like a a reality TV show. It's a yes for me too. I mean, specifically because human rights should be front and center of any effective climate change project, whether it's adaptation or mitigation. And if an entity cannot guarantee that, then it doesn't have any moral ascendancy to actually access the GCF. For me, it's that straightforward. But I would like to end with my my answer with the fact that most of these stories, don't reach international press or media. That's why local sharing from local perspectives will be really crucial. And I'm not putting the regional nodes on the spot, but a lot of these rest on the regional nodes, to gather these stories and make sure that these stories are amplified to bigger audiences and hopefully up to the GCF board and secretary.
Thanks, Kairos. And coming back to the GCF Watch, there's a question about how could organizations connect to the GCF Watch regional nodes in case they want to stay involved?
Yeah, I've provided a list a while ago, but it's, as I've said, if there's anything like general comments on GCF Watch or any general question, you can just send in that to email at info@gcfwatch.org. Or if you want to connect specifically to some of the regional nodes, you can try Asia@gcfwatch.org, Latin America at gcfwatch.org, and Africa at gcfwatch.org. We'll try to answer as quickly as possible, as humanly possible to your questions.
Thank you. And just to add, in the GCF Watch website, you can also see which organizations are the regional nodes and, reach out in your respective regions. So thank you very much. There's two more questions I see. When the next meeting of the GCF board will happen for the approval of new projects? I think Erica mentioned that it's an end of June, beginning of July, but I am quite blank as to what the specific dates are. So if anyone has them, please.
It's going to be June 28th to July 1st, right? 28, 29, 31st. Yeah, June 28th to July 1st. And there will be 4 projects that they're considering 4 funding proposals. One from the Maldives, one from Costa Rica, one from Rwanda, and one that is going to involve a number of African nations, including Ethiopia, Ghana, Guinea, Kenya, Nigeria, and Tunisia.
Thanks for that. And a final question: what is being done to help train country GCF gender monitors and for them to function well in their various countries? Will the GCF give support to these monitors or the WGC? Thank you.
I can try, and then maybe I will also ask Florencia, who is also, I believe, the regional node for GCF Watch for Latin America. So I know that the the Women's Environment Development Organization, has worked a lot with gender monitors across regions, and trying to create a network and improve and create a network of gender monitors, and does fairly frequent meetings and webinars, and does outreach specifically to the gender monitors around the board meeting and projects happening. And I know that they have collaborated with Florencia, so maybe she has more that she can add on this. And I will say that we do, and Tara Daniel, who's leads on their GCF work there, is also an alternate active observer, and participates often, and I'm sure would happily answer any questions about gender monitors as well.
Hi. Well, yeah, actually, Tara, that leads WIDO, does an amazing work also with Andrea Vega, which I believe is connected to this session. And they have created a really interesting and fruitful working group, which joins every 2 weeks to discuss different aspects of the GCF, always with the gender perspective in front of them. So everyone is invited to join this group, well, especially for Latin America, because it's more like dedicated to Latin America. And there's also the gender monitors in Asia and Africa that do their own thing that I can definitely put everyone in contact. And also I'd like to say that the next session that we're gonna have on the 8th of July there's gonna be a special session on gender. So there we're gonna probably have someone from WIDO talking about this. So I invite you to join that session to learn more about this. There, and Andrea is posting her information, so you can contact her to join the Latin American gender group, which is a really, really fruitful space. I invite you all to join in. There's also a listserv apart from these periodic meetings.
I will also mention that in addition to WeDo, I know that Both Ends also works with gender monitors, and works, I think also particularly in maybe with some more in that's for the Latin America one. And I think there's also ones in Africa and Asia as well. Though I don't know all of the context for this.
Thank you, everyone. And as mentioned, the second scheduled webinar for this series is going to specifically target focus on issues of gender, Red Plus, and Indigenous people. So we'll have plenty of time to get into the nitty-gritty of these at the next session. As you know, this one was more like an introduction of the overall work. And we hope to, get more into details of relevant topics for civil society in the second and third sessions, which, as I mentioned, were July 8th and July 29th. So we hope to see you all there. There was a last question, but it's quite a big. Is there a web page to access this information? How to apply to the GCF? Yes, you can just look at the GCF website. As you know, it's been mentioned. I think throughout, it does require accreditation, which is quite a difficult process. But you can access information on the website. Maybe Erica, if you want to give us a few words at the end, especially on how hard it might be for CSOs to access these funds, that would be a good way to closing this meeting. And then, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I think, so there are a couple of different ways. If you're looking to become, an accredited entity to get funding from the GCF for climate projects, that's a lengthy process, and requires, typically, requires having certain policies in place, fiduciary policies, gender, environmental and social policies, et cetera. If you're looking to be involved from the, so that's one type of engagement. So for getting, funding for climate projects, the GCF also accredits, or doesn't, I can't remember what they call it. They approve observer organizations to have official status like we do, right? So like my organization CL is, an official observer organization of the GCF, which means we can attend board meetings and interact that way with the GCF. And that's an easier process. And they put out calls for new observer organizations every couple months. There's a cycle where people can go to apply. And then the last thing I'll say is that if what you're looking to do is be involved with the observer network, with Kairos and me and Bertha and Florencia and all of us, and working with with the network of civil society groups, Indigenous peoples, local communities, being involved with GCF Watch, et cetera, and our preparations for meetings and for interacting with the GCF. You don't need to officially be accredited as an observer to the GCF. You just have to want to engage in that process. And we have a listserv for our observer network that we're happy to add people to, and people can email me to get added to it, or you can email the the organizers of this webinar. You could email Bertha or Florencia or people who've organized this, because they can always put you in touch with me. And you can be added to our observer network to engage with the GCF that way. And so it's depending on what how you want to engage with the GCF or what you're aiming to do. There's a range of things that can happen, some that are more simple than others. And we're happy to have more people as part of our observer network. We're always looking to connect, especially with people in countries and people who are going to be impacted or potentially impacted both positively, hopefully positively, by climate action and people who are on the front lines. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I think we've reached both the end of the time and the questions. So thank you very much to everyone, especially our panelists, for today's session. We hope to see you all in the second and third session, where we'll have, as I said, more time to discuss specific details. And then I'll leave Florencia to close this with her final words.
Thank you so much, Berta, for the moderation. Thank you so much, Erika and Kairos. This has been a really interesting session. Thank you, everyone who was here participating in different time zones. We look forward to having you in the next sessions, and we will also share the information on this webinar, the presentations. They will be also the slides translated in Spanish and in French, so you can all access them. And we will also I will also share the contact information of the people in this webinar so you can reach out. So for example, I'm the regional node in Latin America. So anyone from Latin America can always reach out to me with any of these questions. And you can also access the GCF Watch, where you have information on the other regional nodes. So I will share all that information with all attendees. And I hope to see you again in the 8th of July. Bye-bye to everyone. Thank you.